I was introduced to the world of cryptocurrencies in early 2017 by one of my roommates in university. At the time, he was a much bigger believer in the technology than I was, and we used to spend hours debating on the future of Bitcoin. Him explaining to me why the technology was so revolutionary and why it would replace traditional financial systems, and me explaining all of the challenges that would impede its path to success. It wasn't until late 2019 that I became a full-on Bitcoiner. Now, in our third episode of A Walk Down Satstreet, I'm going to explain what it took for me to go from being a Bitcoin disbeliever to a believer. So here's how I'm going to do this. I'm going to start off by giving you a quick background on myself so that you have an idea of where I was coming from before I was a believer in Bitcoin. I'm going to give you the three main arguments I had against Bitcoin at the time, and then I'm going to talk about how those three arguments changed as I learned more about the technology over time. To give you a quick intro about myself, I'm a recent graduate from the Richard Ivey School of Business, where I was pursuing a pretty traditional career in finance. I was looking to graduate, get my CFA, start my career as an equity research analyst, and eventually move on to become a portfolio manager. So most of my time in university was spent learning about the traditional financial systems that we have in place today. So when I'd initially heard about Bitcoin, I was immediately skeptical. I had a lot of questions regarding how Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies were going to be able to replace the traditional financial systems we have developed over hundreds of years. Now, that being said, I still saw value in Bitcoin as a speculative asset, so I put a little bit of money into Bitcoin just to trade it, and I ended up doing pretty well for myself. I ended up selling Bitcoin in early 2018 for over 200% gain, and I thought that was the last I was going to hear about Bitcoin. I even went as far as making a bet with my roommate in saying that Bitcoin was not going to surpass 10K again in the next 5 years, and boy was I ever wrong. Now, here's the three reasons why I was initially against Bitcoin. The first reason is that at the time, I didn't think Bitcoin was as revolutionary as people made it out to be. This clearly stemmed from a lack of understanding of what Bitcoin really was. And at the time, the main value proposition that I was introduced to was that Bitcoin would allow you to conduct large cross-border transactions for a very low cost. Now, while this was clearly valuable, I already knew about a number of fintech companies that were working on this exact problem. So I didn't see it as enough of a reason for worldwide adoption of Bitcoin. The second reason is that I thought that regulators would step in and snuff out Bitcoin the second that it posed a threat to the traditional financial systems we have in place today. It was my belief that specifically the banking system that we have created to this day was too vital to be disrupted, and that if that were ever a possibility, governments and regulators around the world would step in and shut Bitcoin down. And to a small extent, I was actually proven right at the time, because in 2018, China moved to try to ban all cryptocurrency trading within the country, and China was a massive market for cryptocurrencies. Now, the third reason was that a lot of the influential figures that I was watching at the time, like Warren Buffett and Jamie Dimon, were outspokenly against Bitcoin and said that it had no value. If these guys didn't see value in it, who was I, a second-year university student, to say otherwise? These three reasons led to some extreme confirmation bias in my research on the asset class. The topic of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies was extremely polarizing at the time, and it was very easy to find information to back up these three reasons. But in 2019, all of my perceptions on these reasons changed. After making that bet with my roommate that Bitcoin wouldn't surpass 10K, Bitcoin absolutely blew past that price level and actually reached the price at which I had sold all of my Bitcoin. So there I was, sitting with no Bitcoin in any of my wallet addresses, just wishing that I had held on to at least one Bitcoin. This was when I decided it was time to take a deeper look at what was going on with Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency industry. This led to a year-long deep dive into what a lot of people call the Bitcoin rabbit hole, and I emerged on the other side with a completely different perception of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, and it's why I'm standing here talking to you today. So here's how my perception changed on those three topics. In regards to the first reason, Bitcoin is revolutionary in a number of ways that I didn't understand in 2017. Bitcoin is a permissionless financial network, much like the internet is a permissionless information network. And in fact, a lot of people refer to Bitcoin as the internet of money, and that's a good way to conceptualize the Bitcoin network. Now, Bitcoin actually meets all the requirements to be considered a currency. Bitcoin is durable, as every Bitcoin created will live on forever as a piece of code within the Bitcoin network. Bitcoin is divisible, as each Bitcoin can be divided into 100 million units, each called a Satoshi. Bitcoin is portable, as when you own Bitcoin, what you really own is a private key, and you can store that private key either online or offline and carry it with you at all times. Bitcoin is uniform, and that one's pretty easy to understand as every Bitcoin is made equal. Bitcoin has a limited supply, being that there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin in circulation, and today there's around 18.5 million Bitcoin currently circulating. And finally, Bitcoin is acceptable as a means of payment. While this isn't quite mainstream yet, you'd be surprised at how many people are actually using Bitcoin for day-to-day purchases. Now, Bitcoin being used as a currency is still in its infancy, and we have yet to see if that's actually what Bitcoin is going to be used for in the future. But the value proposition that really excited me about Bitcoin was its use as digital gold. Bitcoin carries a lot of the same properties that make gold valuable, except Bitcoin improves on a lot of the aspects of gold. Bitcoin is more scarce than gold, being that there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin in circulation, as compared with gold, where the supply increases by about 2% every single year. Bitcoin is more easily divisible than gold, as to divide gold you have to melt it down and measure out specific quantities, whereas with Bitcoin you can easily send a fraction of a Bitcoin through the Bitcoin network. It's also easier to conduct transactions with Bitcoin than it is with gold, and finally it's easier to store Bitcoin than it is to store gold. So for these 4 reasons, Bitcoin is actually more useful as a store of value than gold. Now currently Bitcoin's market capitalization sits at around 350 billion US dollars compared to gold's market capitalization of around 10 trillion. And for this reason, as Bitcoin is valued at around 3% that of gold, it made sense to me that more people are going to be accepting Bitcoin due to all the reasons we talked about previously over gold, and we would see an increase in the market capitalization and subsequently the price of Bitcoin over time. Now, of course, I don't know for a fact whether this is actually going to play out, but it is a very interesting value proposition to explore about Bitcoin, and it is clearly more useful than gold. Now, in regards to the second reason, I actually got completely wrong what the regulator's perspective was on Bitcoin. I learned through reading some past press reports that regulators are actually working on ways to allow for the steady adoption of Bitcoin over time. And we've seen some positive developments in recent years, such as the development of qualified custody being offered by firms like Coinbase, Gemini, and Fidelity, which essentially provide you with insurance on your deposits of cryptocurrencies. In addition to that, now that I'm working within the industry and I'm starting to speak with lawyers and accountants and regulators, I'm starting to see much more clearly that everybody's trying to push for regulations that allow for the adoption of Bitcoin over time, which was really great to see. So back in 2017, I was actually completely wrong by thinking that regulators were just going to stomp out Bitcoin as soon as it posed a threat. Now, in regards to the third reason, I realized that listening to just a couple prominent figures wasn't a very good way to learn about a new disruptive technology. Especially when those people that I'm listening to are guys like Warren Buffett, who clearly is the greatest investor of the last century, but he's definitely not the guy to be turning to learn about disruptive new technologies. This is something that's really obvious when I look back on it, but at the time it made sense for me to listen to a guy like Warren Buffett over taking the word of people I hadn't heard about before. So if any of you watching this video are currently sitting on the fence in regards to Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies, or you're a complete disbeliever, take it from a guy who did a complete 180 on the industry that it's worth taking the time to learn more about crypto and Bitcoin. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If any of you want to reach out to our sales team to learn more about what we do at Satstreet, I've included all the information you need in the description down below, and we look forward to seeing you all in next week's video.